So your work centers around this concept of radical honesty, which goes beyond simply not lying. Could you explain what radical honesty truly means and how it differs from what most people would consider, quote, being honest, quote?
Yeah, well, I guess there's kind of three things to talk about. I use the term radical honesty because people have heard it before and they're familiar with it. It was popularized with Brad Blanton's book, Radical Honesty. And it's not exactly what I practice, but it's very close. What I practice is something I call powerful honesty, which is like a flourish of radical honesty. To answer your question, whether it's radical or powerful doesn't matter. What most people consider being honest, if you dive into it and investigate what they're really doing and how they behave in real life, is they are as honest as they're comfortable being, which is they start obscuring or hiding or outright lying when being honest would cause outcomes they're too afraid to face. But because the rest of the time they feel that they're speaking truthfully, they consider themselves to be honest people. In fact, in my own life and in my work, I've discovered that really the biggest lie people tell themselves is that they are honest. Once you believe that lie, it's very impossible to see if you aren't, because you won't even investigate what you're saying. You'll dismiss exceptions and so on. Radical and powerful honesty is where you cross over that line. Essentially, it's where you say the things that you're worried will get a bad reaction. You'll say the things that might hurt the outcomes that you're hoping for. You say the things you're ashamed of or embarrassed by or confused about. You can't even really get clarity on the idea. You're putting people in a position where they actually know who you really are and will judge you accordingly. And you let go of any strategy to control how they see you. You're kind of just letting go of the results and just backing yourself instead. Radical honesty, this is oversimplifying it, but radical honesty is basically speaking your mind without a filter. Whereas powerful honesty is you first check in with yourself if the thoughts that you want to share are truthful. So there's a bit of it's moderation, but not moderation to be dishonest, moderation to be more accurate. And that would be the main difference between, say, what I call my powerful honesty and radical honesty. Radical honesty is you don't question your thinking, you just let it out and figure it out from there, which is, it's still a way of getting to accuracy because you'll go back and forth with the person and clarify things. But with powerful honesty, the question I'd always ask myself before I speak is like, am I sure that what I'm about to say is the most truthful, accurate thing I can think of saying?
Thanks for distinguishing those differences and giving us that framework. And I'm curious, what have you found in your work most prevents people from being able to be powerfully honest?
Everyone's got different specific reasons, different fears, different contexts. Some people are more afraid to be honest at work, others with their family, with their partner, some people just in general. But it's almost certainly, it's kind of obvious, it's a social fear. It's something to do with social consequences that they hope to avoid. For a few people, it's not just that, but it's also just about experiencing emotions they don't want to experience, that honesty would cause either the other person to have or for them to have. So some people, they just don't even want to be honest with themselves because of what it will bring up, and doesn't require the presence of anyone else. They'll lie to themselves in their own head, and I'm sure we all do that to some extent. But for a vast majority of people, it's how others are going to react and the knock-on consequences of that. Generally, the themes of abandonment and ostracism, losing people, not being liked, falling out of favor with the tribe you wish to belong to, whether that's the team at work or the political ideals you align with or whatever, through to things like rejection and humiliation, like in the moment, harsh experiences of having someone conflict with you, and probably the number one fear, confrontation. So to actually have someone push back and to get into a conflict with them. People, myself included, like that was my biggest fear for most of my life. Without exaggerating, I was more afraid of that than dying. I'd rather die than actually have it out face to face with someone. So that was my biggest piece of work, but that was the number one thing preventing me from being honest, and being rejected was a close second.
I also resonate with that. I grew up very conflict avoidant in the southern part of the US, which loves to be nice. And when I hit my low point and made some of my biggest mistakes in my life, even not in making them, I was lying to myself, but also when I had to admit them to those around me, I still lied. I wasn't able to fully tell the truth. And unfortunately, that truth had to be dragged out of me in a sense. And once it did, for me, that was so painful. I'm curious if you had a similar experience to where I had to make a commitment to never allow myself to go back to lying to that degree, because I had seen such negative repercussions of that. I just knew from here on out, I had to make a vow to myself and those around me to do that. And as challenging as it is, it's been very free, because I'll be able to catch myself and be able to say, you know what, this is difficult, but it's not as difficult as what not doing it was like.
Yep, that's pretty much exactly just conceptually the experience I went through. It became a trade-off. Like, there's pain, but the pain's worse from a life of lying than it is from the short-term pain of being honest. It took me a long time to make my peace with that trade-off, essentially. Partly because I think deep down I had a belief that being honest would just be as painful anyway, and I'd get even less outcomes. So I might as well kind of at least get something from being manipulative or secretive. But yeah, it's interesting the way you frame that, like, you're experiencing not just the shame around how other people would react, but even just the pain of, even in company of safe people who you know will react well, just still not wanting to say it because you don't want to hear it. That's that kind of self fear. I don't know what you'd call it. Where you're afraid of your own truth. It's not actually about other people as such. And that was a big one for me. For me, it wasn't so much that I felt reluctant to share it. It's more I was just unaware of it. Like, my brain blocked very obvious truths. It's amazing. I'd get feedback from people and I just literally wouldn't hear it. It would just bounce off me. Other people were seeing these truths about me as to why things weren't working out for me in my life. But the story I had in my head of this noble warrior who's the underdog failing despite his best efforts, there was no room for any other information. So I think I was in deep self-denial for a very long time. And that was how I struggled with self-truth, is I couldn't even see it. So I'm someone like, I'm okay with seeing it once it's out, but some function of my brain decides what I get to see and what I don't, sort of thing, consciously. And when it doesn't want to show me something, I have no awareness that there is even something hidden. And that was probably the most difficult thing for me to deal with.
Yeah, and going back to your initial point about having the true point of reference to know when you're being most honest with yourself, it sounds like that there was no point of reference, because that was just completely out of your consciousness. You weren't able to see it for what it was. And it reminds me of there's several studies that show for men in the workforce that they are drastically overconfident and in their abilities and skills. And I find that in general, humans tend to think they are doing better than they really are, which kind of points to your initial point that, we as humans tend to not tend to think we're more honest than we are. I'm curious if you have found that working with men, that a lot of men don't seem to have that awareness of that they're not receiving feedback, or that they're not being honest, or that they're being overconfident, and, let's say, not aware of the realities of where they're actually at.
What is it, especially with the people who come to me? I don't think overconfidence would be the right term for that problem they have. But overconfidence comes under the same umbrella of a lack of self-awareness, where you have a story in your head about who you are that doesn't actually match your behavior. And I've come to call this the victim hero story. So I first, I used to work with rehabilitating criminal offenders. That's when I first started really getting into this work. And I uh, I was immediately hit with this surprising theme, which is they all saw themselves as the good guy in the story. All of them fucking did. Even the worst guys doing the worst, most horrible thing. I worked with high risk offenders, so these are guys who do serious stuff from murder on down. And nearly every one of them was the hero in his story, who was pushed to it, or was doing it for a just cause, or had been provoked, and or was, at the very least, was a victim of his upbringing, and can't be held to account, and so on. Like, very few of them are just like, yeah, I fucked up, I'm a bad guy. And those ones were the ones I actually could rehabilitate. But the rest, the first piece of work was trying to deal with the story they told themselves about how and I call it the victim hero, because they're the hero of the story, but they're also the underdog. In fact, that's what makes them the hero of the story. Like, the odds are stacked against them, life is unfair on them, their behavior is always justified, other people are jerks. And that's what makes them, like, if in a movie they're the one you're rooting for, right? That in their movie, which means anything they do is justified. Lying, harming people, it's all the necessary acts of the underdog trying to get out from under the bottom. And so, a guy being overconfident, again, he's just, what's that new lingo? He's main character, right? He's the main character of the universe. So he isn't even open to the idea that he could be as flawed and judgmental and blind as everybody he sees around him. We generally think of ourselves as special, like I'm this unique thing, that I'm somehow superior in some way to the others. Even like the story about being inferior to others is still like a hero story. Like I'm inferior, which means I've had extra bad luck, which means I'm actually special. And that was my story. It always centered around women when I was in my 20s because that was my biggest pain point. This like guy who should be attractive to women but isn't. This poor like martyr something, picked on by the universe, being tested for no good reason, and holding the weight of the world on his shoulders so that everybody else could have a good time. That was a story I told myself. And yet other people who cared about me, watched me closely, were like, nah, dude, you're doing this to yourself. Like, you're writing this story. Like, it doesn't have to be this way. And it just bounced off me because my whole mental landscape was filled with this other story that I was very attached to and very invested in. That's what I see. So an overconfident guy, he's attached to a story that prevents him from having to face dark truths about himself, the same things he judges in others, the same things he looks down on, that he's actually probably worse than the rest of them. Yeah, and that's why I say the biggest lie we tell ourselves is that we're honest. It's like the lie we tell ourselves is the lie about who we actually are. And if we believe that lie, then there's no room for self-development. There's no room for humility, for feedback to get in, for results to be measured accurately. And how can you be honest when you're starting with a dishonest platform like that? Anything you say comes from that place.
Yeah, it reminds me of this framework in my work with clients for therapy that, trauma makes you the victim or the hyperhero. And I use this story of Peter Pan. Now, he's the victim and Wendy is the hyperhero. But it's a similar thing. Wendy grows up too fast. She has to take on too much responsibility at too young of age. And Peter Pan, he never grows up. He's with the Lost Boys, who represents, underdeveloped man. And at first I thought, Wendy comes into Never Never Land, helps Peter Pan grow up. It's a very common story in heterosexual relationships, right? The woman comes in, helps her find the man. He rises to the occasion. But then I realized that Peter Pan actually helps Wendy become a child again and restores that innocence. But I think either way, there's this dynamic you're getting at, which many people who do things that look hero-like are actually done out of a victim mindset, which is no one is gonna care for me, or I feel like I need to be cared for, and so I'm gonna do this thing as overcompensation. But deep down, that mindset driving it is this victim mentality, which I also relate to, right? And I think the second point, very powerful, is you brought up how the narratives is what drives our behaviors about life. And this is where I think a lot of people misunderstand why people do the actions they do. If it's a maladaptive behavior, it's because they have an irrational belief. Because if it made sense, they wouldn't do it. So your point about this narrative, and I relate to this too. I just wrote the script. I put my head down and I read it, and people are like, "Hey, that line doesn't sound right. I don't think that's accurate," or, that's not who you are. And instead of being open and honest about reviewing the script, being willing to edit it, it's like, no, this is just who I am. I'm sorry, deal with it. And no one else is going to understand it. Poor me. And you reach this point where you finally have to look at the script for what it is and really ask yourself, is it true? As much as I want to believe it's true, or as much as I think it has been true in my life, is it actually true? And that's a painful moment of coming to terms with life as itself and where you're at, to realize that script needs to be rewritten. And one of the narratives that you work with, big one, is called the nice guy syndrome, which, for those who don't know, is a pattern of people pleasing and seeking approval that leads to superficial relationships and low self-worth. So I'm curious, how did you first recognize that pattern in yourself, and what were the consequences of living this way?
Yeah. With regards to how I first saw it in myself, it was no one big epiphany. It was more like drips coming in a slowly like dawning awakening process over a number of years. But for most of my life, I was the fish in water who doesn't know what water is. Like, I was nice guy syndrome. There was no external view of it. The reason the book No More Mr. Nice Guy called my cover is because I literally called myself a nice guy in my head. Long before anybody else came up with that term, that was my banner that I lived on. I remember sitting at lunch in high school after some girl I had a crush on went with some other guy because I didn't make a move, kind of thing. And just thinking, going, well, at least I'm the nice guy. At least I can, it's kind of stuff they'd call like incel thinking now. Like, at least I'll be the one that role models what a real guy should be, and all these jerks, blah, 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 right? But I had that as like something I was proud of, which of course it was like my survival strategy. I might as well be proud of the thing that like I can't get out of, or otherwise I'm going to suffer. But basically, at some point in my early mid 20s, I finally took responsibility for specifically as my struggles with women, but as an extension, just my struggles socially. Since high school, I'd struggled to make new friends. I thought that like that would come naturally to me. In university, I made no new friends. I just didn't sort of know how. Everyone liked me, but nobody would invite me to their parties, sort of thing. Like I just wasn't loved. And I went through a big drought with women after my first girlfriend and I broke up that told me, like, I can sit around whinging that I'm unlucky with women, or I can ask, like, why. I guess I just got frustrated enough to finally ask, like, what if it's me? And what if it's controllable? Like, what if it's not some curse or some, perpetually broken thing that can't be fixed? What if it's somehow me, like, self-sabotaging here? I went through a whole phase where I got worse rather than better. I went through the whole pickup artist thing, which we may or may not get into. But one of the few positives that came out of that was I realized that the results I was getting socially were a direct response to my behavior. That it wasn't luck. It wasn't sort of like preordained, doesn't matter what you do. That if, for example, I showed that I was interested in a girl, the likelihood of something happening with that girl went way up, as opposed to not showing anything at all. And I thought, well, I spent my whole life not showing anything. Maybe that's one of the reasons why. And I just started to get this awareness like, okay, at least I know now the problem is behavioral. Because I've tried different behaviors and I got different results. Now, granted, those behaviors were equally as manipulative and the results were probably just as unhealthy, just at the other end. Go from no woman at all to crazy, toxic woman. There's sort of like, there's some improvement, I guess. But it just showed me, like, I am not who I think I am. This is adjustable. It's flexible. It depends on what I do. What I do is who I am. And now I don't know the exact timeline in my head, but at some point I was really going hard on honesty. I went from sort of trying to seduce people to just this radical honesty idea. I became obsessed with honesty because it was way more fun. It was thrilling. It was just this weight being lifted off my shoulder every time. Like I was starting to feel emotions again. I'd been very numb for a very long time. And then I saw the book No More Mr. Nice Guy, and I was just finally in the right place to hear what he had to say. And I've often described it like reading that book. Every page was like getting kicked in the nuts. It was like the dude was trying to deconstruct me personally. And many nice guys feel that way when they read that book. And other people, it's kind of like a 50-50 hit and miss because there's different sort of range on that spectrum. But I was poster boy nice guy. I was all the things, all the boxes ticked. I was the model for that disorder. And so that book was like having an expert pull my brain apart. But by that time, I was already doing a lot of the sort of reparative work and seeing it clarified exactly what work I needed to be doing. The conclusion I finally came to, the big truth I finally faced within myself was that I was manipulative. That nice is a manipulation. It's a manipulation sold as moral nobility, sold as being the good guy, and you're actually the antagonist. You're the bad guy in the story, not the good guy. But because you're telling yourself that you're the good guy, you don't question what you're doing. People pleasing, and I get a lot of blowback for this. But people pleasing is, by and large, one of the most effective and malicious forms of manipulation available to human beings. It flies under the radar, it gets pleasurable reactions, which makes people lower their guard, and it insidiously sort of creeps up throughout a relationship where you create a codependency with people 1 inch at a time. I'd consider violence and threats to be a lesser form of manipulation than people pleasing. And once I saw just how much I did it, like every day, starting to see myself do it, forcing my help on people, giving advice when I wasn't asked, pretending to laugh at jokes I didn't find funny just so that they'd think this, that, and the other about me, and guilt tripping people with kind of little martyrdom, sulking, passive aggressive moves to make people feel like they owed me something. Like it was like nothing I was doing was good. I mean, that was a big slap on the face. Whereas honesty felt like the exact opposite. It felt pure, clean, free. It was a way of giving people all the information they needed to make an informed decision that just killed any manipulation or strategies that might have been trying to come through, so that finally, if someone liked me, I could trust that they actually did like me, that they hadn't been conned into it. And if someone disliked me, I would be like able to let them go, because it's never going to work if they don't like who I am anyway. There's no point in like trying to force the square peg into the round hole kind of thing. Yeah, that was kind of the transition. There was lots of little pieces of feedback from people here and there, and they slowly started to get through to me. One girl said that my self-deprecating humor had a pathetic vibe to it. I often use that to make people feel sorry for me while making them laugh. I had like guys who were adept socially telling me, this is you, it's because you're too nice. And I kept hearing the words too nice, too nice, too nice over and over again. I wouldn't hear that from a lot of people, from a range of people who have no real agenda other than to be honest with me. I wouldn't keep hearing that if it was a good thing. I wouldn't keep hearing that if it was a healthy thing that people liked. Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on, but those are the kind of experiences that come to mind.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing your story and also how you frame people pleasing. I agree with that. I think calling it what it is, which is misexpressed connection, and you will never be able to live up to pleasing someone else simply because you're not that other person. And your desire to please them isn't coming from a pure place to simply please them. It's actually coming from the place where they're giving you something, which is being pleased. And until you are honest with yourself and see it for what it is, like you were, you will constantly, going back to the victim hero, think you're the hero. Well, of course, because nice guys make other people laugh. They give more than anyone else. They make sure everyone else is taken care of. And ironically, these main roles that men often play, provider, protector, these kind of things, are not able to be fully tapped into because they're seen in such a shallow, fluffy manner instead of actually protecting the honesty and authenticity of who you are and those around you. You're protecting the ego, you're protecting the fear of rejection, you're protecting the abandonment that you sense would happen if you were to be honest. And my sense of it, I'm curious if you've dove into this kind of language or concept, but I often say the deepest question people have is, am I lovable? And if I'm honest, and if I share what's really going on, warts and all, and maybe it's a terrible thing I'm sharing, the real question is, if they saw the real me, would I be loved? And people pleasing always prevents you from being seen as the real person that you are, because the goal and the primary form of connection is the projection of who you feel like you need to be, not the reality of who you actually are.
Yeah, I think it would be accurate to say that every single people pleaser on the planet has already answered the question, am I lovable, with no. And so they've come up with a strategy for that problem, which is, well, if I'm not lovable, I've got to create someone who is. And I'll get the closest next best thing to a connection, a pseudo connection with my representative. And that's what I noticed, like having studied psychology of confidence for so long now, is confident people, if anything, they're asking a different question, which is, do I love myself? If the answer is yes, then I'll let the chips fall where they may. There's no reason not to be not to be honest, because I don't need that from anybody else. I'll just make sure I'm surrounded by people who are a good fit for me, and I don't have to try. I don't have to remember anything. But every people pleaser, it's this is why I like coaching people pleasers as opposed to, say, narcissists or psychopaths who I've worked with in the past. It's oversimplifying, but they come from a good place at the core of it. It's good infected with insecurity. And then the final manifestation is people pleasing behavior. So, in the attempt to be good while avoiding those things you talk about, abandonment, rejection, protecting the ego, that compromise to try and make both happen, you get people pleasing rather than, say, genuine generosity or helpful, honest feedback or confrontations to better our relationship. You don't get that like pure, as you might say, sort of like powerfully masculine, healthy behaviors. You get like a watered down off brand version that's designed to try and keep the peace while also expressing decency. And there's very few truthful things that can get through that filter. Very few deep things can get through that. One of my most cringy experiences is to watch a first date. Every now and then I'll be at a restaurant or something. I've got like an eye for a first date. And I just spotted and I'm like, oh god. Watching these two representatives talk to each other while the real people hide behind the curtain, you know. And you can see it. I'm like, do you guys not see it? Do you guys not see how fucking obvious you are? Like, nobody talks like that. Nobody's that enthusiastic about the entree or whatever, you know, like, chill. You guys would probably like each other if you could just stop doing this. But if you come to the conclusion, I'm unlovable, toxic shame, as Brene Brown might put it, every one of my clients, they have a different way of describing it, but it's this idea there's something wrong with me. Fundamental, unfixable, universally unlovable, and a patch up job is the only solution. I used to frame it, it's a weird way of putting it. I call it the boiled potato. I was watching comedian Billy Connolly, and he was talking about how he looks all interesting because of his hair and everything, but if you shaved him, he'd look like a potato. And he says he uses the hair to hide the fact he's just this very basic looking thing. And I'd always felt that way about myself. I was like, man, you know, I've always had sort of interesting facial hair and earrings and stuff like that to like throw off people from the idea that I am this round, plain white thing. But that really stood out to me. I was really moved by his comedy with that because that's exactly what I thought about myself. Is that like if I don't dress this up, and I don't just mean physically, but personality wise, if I don't like amp it and dial other things down and put sprinkles on it and make sure it's fucking particularly entertaining, impressive, interesting, funny, positive, helpful. All these trimmings I got to put on top to hide the fact that it's just a potato underneath, and nobody prefers a potato when there's other options available. And I found that every one of my clients has a version of that belief. Like, if they saw what I really was, they would fucking run. So I can't show them that. I got to show them something else if I want any kind of love. Which is, of course, it's tragic and brutal because the one way to guarantee you're connected to no one is to be fake. Like, the guaranteed outcome is loneliness. Whereas at least being real, you might hit it lucky with somebody. Even if you're a total, you know, obnoxious, disgusting human being, there'll be somebody who'll be like, that's my jam right there, you know. But if you don't show it, then nobody possibly click, and the best you'll have is connections that the other people might believe they're real, but you know they're not. And that'll always, that awareness will always be with you. You'll always be that glass between you and the world, that bubble effect. My clients and I often talk about like feeling like an alien pretending to be a human, you know, just trying to like just don't let them know what I really am. Like, just play the game. So yeah, I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I've never fully correlated the epidemic of loneliness with the epidemic of dishonesty. But now that I'm thinking about it, you're right. Being honest is the only way we can have connection. And I was laughing about the first date experience. I'm the same way. I will look at first dates, but I also look at older couples. And this is also just as sad where, you know, older couples tend to not be on their phone, but they're not talking because they've never formed the connection and been real. And so there's just kind of just awkward looking down at the table of the food, you know. And of course, that's probably too harsh of a judgment. Maybe they're just comfortable in each other's presence. But, you know, it reminds me of Elaine Baton, School of Love. He has this concept. He says, you know, on first dates, we always love to bring our best selves. Here's what I'm good at. Here's the best parts of me. Here's why you should love me. He says, if you really want to find love, you should do the opposite. He said you should show up to the date and you should say your worst fears, your biggest insecurities, the things you're most ashamed of. He said you'll find out really quickly if that person's your life partner. And you know, he's half joking in there, but it's getting a bit to what you are, which is, you know, even though trust and safety and security are progressively earned and developed based on the relational status, certainly, there still needs to be some onus and focus on the honesty and authenticity as the primary form of connection. And if you're not, then to really reflect and revisit where you're at with that. But it can be hard to distinguish that sometimes, which brings me to my next question about knowing how to distinguish between being honest and using honesty to get an outcome. So I'm curious, those seem very, there's some overlap there. Could you explain the difference and why it matters for men who are trying to build integrity?
Yeah, well, it's a kind of an advanced issue. Like, first, try to be honest, and then we'll try to figure out if you're really being honest or using honesty as a strategy. Because one of the ironic highlights, one of the reasons people start using honesty as a strategy is because honesty works. And then they start trying to make it work rather than just keep being honest. And I've seen this quite a few times. Like, a lot of the people I work with, will go and experiment with honesty, and they're pleasantly surprised with the results. So it's not nothing but total rejection like they expected, even though they are like ready to handle that. While there is, of course, much more controversy than there used to, they'll find that people actually really love them right out of the gate. That's how quickly they can connect with people. They never knew it could be done in minutes rather than months. And even when it doesn't go well, so to speak, they're proud of themselves and they feel relieved of their burdens, and they have interesting experiences and they find out who people really are. So there's really no loss. Even when somebody hates you afterwards, you're like, well, it's probably good to know that they hate me. Like, I guess I won't make them the best man at my wedding next time. But then they get all excited about how it's working and they try to make it work because they relapse to that attachment to outcomes. They go from, as you say, the onus being on honesty to using honesty for some other onus, usually the old results that they've always wanted, the validation and approval from others. The way to know the difference really is, are you willing to say or do something that would lose the person or lose the outcome, your preferred outcome, whatever it is? And it's a good way to, like, I used to do this in team meetings when I was really obsessed with honesty and bringing everyone into it. Question my coach told me is, what's something you don't want us to know about you? You just go around, everyone answers that question, and we get honesty. Like, you get really clear on what honesty is when you answer that question. If you want them to know the answer, it can be unclear as to whether you're being honest or using truthful information as a strategy to get an outcome, right? But, I've got a kind of joking stratagem that I do with my clients, which is called farting on the first date, which is very similar to what you're just talking about now, which is, it's not so much that you come out and do some big trauma dump on the person, but as the conversation in a reciprocal way goes back and forth, your focus is on actually trying to push them away with honesty. And this is a kind of counterbalance to the potential for being attached to them and trying to get them, is you actually try to get rid of them. The more you like them, the more you push. So you go, okay, you think to yourself, like, what's the thing I need to say that would really end this, that's true about me? It's not like every word out of your mouth is following that, but just when you're getting attached, when you're getting needy, when you notice yourself starting to people please or something again, you can use this to kind of reset the slate. And what you'll find, and this is what I found with my now wife, we made the kind of progress in our connection in 3 months that usually takes people a decade. We used to quite literally joke about it, like, feels like we've been together for 5 years, because we had these conversations. Some of them I've actually turned into tools. Like, we had one conversation, I was like, let's list everything that we think the other person that'll be a deal breaker for the other person. All the things, whether it's past, present, thoughts, feelings, beliefs, anything you think, like, if you found that out about me, it'd be over. Let's get them all out up front. It's one of our earliest conversations. And another one is a game I play. You ask each other questions, and just the rule is, it's like truth or dare without the dare. You just have to answer honestly. So immediately you start asking questions to, like, get the dirt. And with the right person, this accelerates the connection. Most people do what I call getting to know each other, which is pretending to be something while slowly drip feeding pieces of truth over time in, like, the safest way possible, like trying to poison someone without them noticing or something. And it's such an illogical way to build a relationship, because you grow an attachment and an investment before you even know what you're investing in. And this is where you get, like, I personally think this is the leading actual cause of divorce, is they weren't honest at the start, and those chickens came home to roost. They were never supposed to be together. They would have figured that out in 2 weeks with radical honesty. It took them 10 years instead.
I couldn't agree more. And my added thought about, especially with the divorce, is that unless it's more of an extreme situation, almost every relationship can be worked out if you want it to. Now, you always maintain the right if you want it to or not. But to write it off as a victim mentality, that it's because of them or it's because of some external circumstance, is an excuse. You just have to be real. Did I pick the right set of problems that I want to live with? Because this person will not ever be perfect. And my ability to come to terms with who they are in that imperfection is the thing that allows me to love them. And I couldn't agree more in that when we project or try to bond or connect over the strengths that we have, those are easy to accept and almost don't define love in and of itself, because they're convenient to a degree, right? Because I mean, who Who wouldn't like a good thing that's easy to accept? It's not a burden. But when you're faced with having to see the wounds of someone else and the pains and the true baggage or burdens that you are going to be responsible not for taking from them, because that's enablement, but an interdependence where you support them in them facing those things and working through it and healing. That's the real sign that love is work. It takes intentionality. It's inconvenient. It's going to cost you. But most people are trying to ask themselves if they should be on a relationship based on the benefits they're getting, not the responsibilities they're incurring. And if I'm understanding you correctly, it's that shift to say, of course, you deserve to also be taken care of. That's the flip side. It's not just that you're doing that for someone else, but it's this genuine exchange of responsibility that you have to see that person for who they really are before I love you can really mean something. And I just appreciate you distinguishing those differences on how people can use honesty to push someone away, which actually at the core is, in a sense, being dishonest. And you've said that being dishonest is actually at the heart of most suffering and anxiety, which I agree with, is an interesting framework. What are the connections between the small ways we're dishonest every day, maybe on those first dates or as we're getting to know someone or at work, and the larger issues like low confidence, superficial relationships, and lack of fulfillment?
Excellent question, because the number one pushback I get around being honesty is something along the lines of little white lies. The name we give to the so-called small dishonesties that, lubricate the system, the social harmony moves, being polite, for example. I could go on a whole rant about politeness. Telling someone you're too sick to go to the party when actually you just don't want to go. All these little things that we consider to be acceptable lies. And this is what I said before, like how everyone thinks they're honest. They're honest up to the point where it'd be uncomfortable to be honest. And this is the thing they're uncomfortable being. But it's such a small thing that they write it off as like, it's like petty cash. It doesn't even go into the accounting books, but actually it added all up and it's millions of dollars. And I would say this is actually where the work begins, as you start noticing the little things you do. The big ones are actually not, I don't want to undermine them, they are important, but it's the little ones, it's the death from a thousand cuts. Because Sam Harris put this really well when he was talking about white lies. For a start, it's a form of gaslighting. I'm slightly shifting reality for you, and you don't know I'm doing it. Like I say, if you ask, you want to come to the party, I say I'm a bit sick. Not only do I give you the impression I'm sick when I'm not, which will change your worldview, your map around who I am, the decisions you make in relation to me. You might then tomorrow, like, are you feeling better, so on? So now I've had an impact on your behavior ongoing. I've changed who you are. You've got sympathy where there's nothing to be sympathetic for. But also I've given you the impression that that's the only reason I'm not coming. So any problems I have with you, any distaste I have for your parties, you're completely unaware of that. You're now living under the assumption I love your parties. If only I could go. Now imagine that as a drop in the pond and then the ripple out effect, the chaos theory, butterfly wings kind of effect of you dripping things like that 3 or 4 times a day, every day, often in long-standing relationships. So people will look at this compartmentalized. It was one little lie, one time, no one got hurt. Say, okay, but what's the compound interest on that? Especially when you also compound it with every other one of your little lies and your big lie world that you're creating. Somebody might do a little bit of people pleasing at work. Like someone's like, how was your weekend? You're like, oh, not bad, when actually it sucked. And you think, well, what's the harm in that? I don't want to bring them down, blah, blah, blah. Whatever excuse you give to avoid the fact that, you're just a coward about being honest. Well, what if you do that all the time? They now have an impression of you as a person. And that impression as a person is just cruising. This person's got a good life. They're fucking crushing it. They're happy all the time. If they're naive enough to believe you, that is, right? And some people pleasers are good at selling the lie. What happens when they now compare their life to yours and go, oh my God, look at him, he's got his stuff together all the time, he never has any problems, I'm such a fucking mess. Everybody around me, they had a great weekend, mine sucked, like am I the only one who's... And now they start to have low self-worth by comparison with something that doesn't even exist. Whereas if you go into work and how's your weekend, you're like, oh, it fucking sucked, man, I just got out of bed wrong on Saturday and couldn't get my head back in the game, just went downhill from there. The other person might be like, oh my God, me too. I thought I was the only one who sucked at life. And they have a completely different ongoing, that might be a life-changing experience for them. And I'm not exaggerating. Sometimes one person being honest with you about how hard life is can validate your own struggle so hard that like half your shame is gone overnight, right? And that's what you're depriving people of with these little lies. But it's like one way to look at the effect of little lies is like social media. Everyone putting their highlight reel as if that's their life. You know, that kind of correlation. The more someone posts about their partner and kids, the more their fucking family's falling apart. You know, like that sort of thing. Like if they're doing really well, you wouldn't hear about them at all. People scrolling on this thinking that's life. That's what other people are really doing. That's how they're actually feeling. You know, they're that interesting and they're having that much fun and they're that happy and all these wonderful events are happening. Whereas if you actually went and watched their life, you'd be like, oh, that's like 5% of it. The rest of it's suffering. I don't need to be jealous of this. White lies also distort your own reality. Because, you know, I don't need to tell you about cognitive dissonance. If you say one thing and believe another, the brain goes, I can't have this. One of these, we've got to pick a winner here. And this is at the heart of nice guy syndrome. The ultimate suffering is you lose who you are when your brain tries to reconcile the differences with how you express yourself and what you actually think, what you actually feel. Every time you say, I'm fine with something when you're really upset, your brain has to decide whether you're fine or upset. And in order to keep the impression that you're fine, it has to suppress upset. It keeps suppressing it, and now you actually don't feel upset. Well, actually you do, but you can't actually register it consciously. You might just, I don't know, murder your partner in 10 years instead. Which is, you know, I used to work with murderers, and 50% of them were nice guys who killed their partner. And that's the only crime they've ever committed. All those years of build-up. Snap. So that's the cost of white lies. I take white lies, you know, small, little, harmonious dishonesties very seriously because they're all soldiers in a massive army. They don't look bad on their own, but when you see what they come with, when you see the whole army, you see, oh, that's why my life sucks.
Yeah, I resonate and agree with all of that. It reminds me of a few things. One, I forget the name of the book, but this guy writes on how in World War II with Nazi Germany, he talks about how many of the Nazis started as these very innocent, good, loving townspeople
Ordinary men.
that
Yep.
were that's it. All right. So exactly. So they were just ordinary people. And then within just a few years span, they turned into these, cruel murderers. And there's something that I appreciate Jordan Peterson says is that we often, and you said this earlier, that we often peg ourselves as the hero. Oh, I would never do something like that. I could never. And you realize that the potentiality for fully manifesting that lies within the white lies, lies within how you manifest it on a micro level. But because it's on a micro level, you justify it. Like you said, it's not so bad. Who's hurt by it? Any of that. But it avoids seeing it as being a seed of potentiality that is just as evil, just on a smaller scale, obviously. And the pushback I get is, well, you don't want to shame yourself. And it's saying exactly, you don't want to make it too intrinsic to where that white lie is who you are. You want to see that white lie for what it is, which isn't the truth, which isn't who you are, which isn't the deep, good person that you are. And someone that has a consciousness can distinguish that and very immediately know when that white lie is violating the person that they are. And then second, it reminds me of person-centered therapy of Carl Rogers. He says oftentimes a therapist carries this ideal projection in the client's eyes. And I'm sure you have the same as a coach. It's like they just think, oh, that's Dan, and he's worked through his shit. He's faced everything, and look at him, and I'm the one who needed help. He says your ability to honor the primacy and the nature of the experience of who someone is and just as they are, and the radical acceptance of who they are, opens them up to trust you more, but also your ability to share that with them. So something I do with clients is I share appropriately the shit I go through. Yeah, I'm telling you this, and I'm gonna get off this call, and I'm gonna get in a conflict with my wife, and they kind of laugh, and I'm like, no, I'm serious. I'm a hypocrite, like I'm getting paid to tell you something that I'm not fully living out. And sometimes people are shocked, but oftentimes there is that connection because they can lower their shoulders. Oh, thank God, this guy's real. He's still credentialed to help guide me in whatever way. That doesn't go away, but you maintain that honesty is saying we're both human, and the main way we're going to connect is realizing that most of life is ordinary, most of it's suffering, most of it is painful, and most of the time we do it wrong in the sense of we're not nailing it. It's not perfect like we project on social media. I love that analogy, by the way. But anyways, it just reminds me that that person-centered approach really is the key to having close relationships. And speaking of relationships, this last question here. So when a guy starts practicing the radical honesty, facing the white lies, and starting to live out of that integrity, there often is a fear that relationships will be damaged or rejected. But you hinted at this earlier. But what typically happens in reality when someone is more honest? I guess what's this final pitch, Dan, that radical honesty is really worth doing as an everyday skill?
Yes, there will be things that come to an end. Anything built on lies will either be replaced, like restarted, or destroyed. And there's no point going in with some false optimism that everything will work out perfectly well. But in a way, it will. It'll work out the way it needs to work out. If somebody hates you for who you are, then them leaving your life is an excellent result. And it takes some time to realize that that's a good result, that that's worth having, that even if you hoped for something else with them, if it really was good, this wouldn't be happening. You're attached to something that doesn't exist. There's a couple of sort of surprising things that will happen. One is, unless you're really naive, and some people are, and it's not a judgment, it's just lessons to be learned. No one's going to surprise you too much. The ones you're worried about them for a reason. You already know something's up. And the other ones, you're like, yeah, they're pretty safe. Like, I could tell them anything. I'm still nervous about doing it, but I know them. Like, we're going to be good. So there'll be a few shockers. I've had a few where I'm like, okay, this one will be all right. And afterwards, I'm like, I thought we were best mates and we're actually nothing. Ouch. But that is also countered by the opposite, where I had people from the periphery come to the center. People who I see occasionally at a party or something. I get along with them all right, but nothing major. I'd suddenly become honest and suddenly they had really deep connections forming with these people. Like, they'd been waiting for me. And I got these like surprising friendships emerge. What I'd suggest though is if you go in hoping for good social results, you're setting yourself up to get hurt, and you're also, the onus is on the wrong thing, as you say. You'll start compromising the honesty whenever you start getting some ripples. The main thing you're going to get out of this is, as cheesy as it sounds, a relationship with yourself. And this is what I always tell people, like, there's only one relationship that you're in for life that you can't get out of, and that's the one with you and the voice in your fucking head. And if that relationship sucks, nobody on the outside can do anything about that. There's no result that fixes that. Look at all the celebrities who are rich and famous who kill themselves and take drugs and stuff. That's not the answer. You can't solve the voice in your head problem externally. But one of the things that, this is my experience, and I've seen it consistently with my clients, is the voice in your head starts to become a bit kinder and more encouraging and more loving and more of a cheerleader when you focus on being honest. It's like all that self-criticism is a warped way of you trying to hold yourself to account that you're just not living with integrity. It doesn't say it like that. It might say, oh, you're stupid or fat. It doesn't mean that. It means like there's something off. You're not doing it right. And that was the first thing I noticed, and it would happen instantly as well as long term. So I'd confront someone and walk away from that like, fuck yes, finally said it. Even though they had a mare and I'm never going to see them again. And I'd be like, well, it's just me and me. Like, I'm not getting my validation from anyone else. That was a very new experience for me. I used to always have to go get it from someone else. I had to impress someone and get approval from someone else for me to feel good for another few hours. And I'd just be there with just me and just that going well. And that's why I got so obsessed with honesty at the start, was I was getting high off that. I might go up and tell a girl that I'm attracted to her, and she's like, no thanks, I got a boyfriend. I'm not even hearing her. I'm so stoked with myself. I was like, I can't believe I said that. Fuck, I'm brave. I'm sorry, what'd you say? I'm like, oh yeah, you're still here? Just the reward of that's like, you think of the kid on the soccer team who never gets to play and he finally gets called off the bench, how fucking grateful he is to be in the game. That's what it felt like that thing inside me who never gets to speak, who has so much stuff to say and is always squashed and always replaced with the representative. He was like off the bench and he was shaky. When I first started being honest, it was very inarticulate, very kind of weak and stuttery and, infused with shame and lack of sort of confidence and so on. Get all red faced and shaky, embarrassed. But I just stuck with it. And it's like he got better and better, and nowadays, sometimes people will actually struggle to believe I'm being honest because I'm sort of well spoken or articulate. but it's just because I've got so much practice now that honesty can become, what did one of my clients call it? Finessed. You get to the point where it's poetic and articulate and particularly strong and well worded and all those things. They're not necessary at the start, but it can become like an art. You paint with honesty. It's really weird. It's like I write non-fiction books, but it still feels like art to me. It's I don't need fiction for it to feel like art. It's like, what is the best way to put something, the most accurate way to put something? And that's actually a form of art. It comes down to my own subjective view of things. But that self-validation, that's the real prize here. And I've been studying psychology for so long, I can't find a better way of doing it than this. I've tried every fucking way there was. This was actually my last resort, honesty. I was at the end of my rope. I'm like, I've tried every way of being. And then I finally clicked, there's one thing I haven't tried, which is just cards face up on the table all the time. It's one thing I've never done. Everything I've ever done before that involves some form of strategy. I've never tried no strategy of total transparency. As soon as I tried it, I'm like, fuck, I wish someone had told me sooner. I wasted my life. But yes, if you're attached to social outcomes, especially at the beginning, you are going to get hurt and disappointed. If you make that the reason for doing this, it's pointless. Yeah, honesty, I genuinely think actually honesty gets better results in terms of you're more attractive, people trust you more, you develop friendships with healthier people. I actually do believe in the result. I don't think you're making a sacrifice, but you get a lot more negatives as well. Every one person who likes you for who you are, there's 10 who don't. And you're going to find out through 11 attempts, you're going to find out those other 10. You have to endure those 10 and just, let them go and go, okay, honesty rather than keeping them in my life. But I guess that's why I'm so passionate about this. I just don't know of another way to live that's better. And also, I think a warning is, you kind of alluded to it before, once you open the door and go through, it closes behind you. It's very hard to go back to being dishonest once you've started with honesty. It's too uncomfortable, too much dissonance. So I would warn people, like, if you start this journey, you're pretty much burning your bridges. Like, you won't be able to you won't be able to like reconcile dishonesty again. It will haunt you from now on. So don't go into it if you don't believe in it, because it's very hard to get out of. I'm just happy to be in it.
No, that's so well said, and such a powerful image to encapsulate our conversation and the takeaway for men, which is that, every man has a place in the world that deserves to be expressed and seen for who he is. The lie is that it needs to be seen and accepted by everyone. The truth is that most people will reject and deny it, but that's actually a good thing, because then clearly the connections you have, like you were saying earlier with losing friends. That's not real. That's not real. That wasn't full of depth. That actually was skewed or manipulated. And you start seeing things for what they are, which at first is a true felt sense of loss, because you are losing the perception of connection. You're losing the perception of power, of pleasing people, of belonging. But when all that dispels and the dust settles, what's left is who you are. And it reminds me of this famous quote when they asked Michelangelo how he made the statue David. He said, "I simply chipped away all that was not David." And that is the call to every man: is you have started as this bland stone that has tried to stay out of the limelight, stay out of confrontation, not tried to be your authentic self. And it takes a chipping away. As you're saying, it's painful. The door is shut. It's a lonely path. Most people won't appreciate you or get you, but you're being who you are. And at the end of the day, if you're cool with you and you can accept that, that's all that matters. So many good takeaways today, Dan. I'm just so thankful for your wisdom and choice that you made all those years ago to stop being a nice guy, to own up to your life, and to now help other people do the same. So curious where people can find your work if they want to stop being nice and start being the true man they're meant to be.
Yeah, look, I appreciate being on here, man. In terms of finding my work, if you just Google Brojo, you'll quickly figure it out. I've got a community that people can join for free, and they actually get my Nice Guy Recovery course as a gift for joining that. That's a pretty good starting place if you're resonating with what we're talking about here today. It'll take you through the sort of basic fundamentals of how to get off the ground with a new way of living. But yeah, you start with the community and you'll find the rest. My content's everywhere and so on. I'm on all the channels. But that's I think, the best place to start if you really want to make some changes.
All right, sounds good. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes. And guys, be honest, be radically honest, be powerfully honest, be honestly yourself. Until next time.
Cheers.